Welcome to the Lowenstein Sandler podcast series, the Women's Initiative Network, Real Talk. I'm Rachel Dickovics, Counsel in Lowenstein's white-collar defense practice group and a member of the Women's Initiative Network at Lowenstein Sandler. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast series at lowenstein.com/podcast or find us on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, or SoundCloud. Now let's take a listen.
Welcome to another episode of the Women's Initiative Network, Real Talk. I'm one of your hosts, Jessica Kriegsfeld, and I'm an associate in Lowenstein Sandler's Executive Compensation, Employment, and Benefits Practice Group.
Hi, I'm Julie Werner. I am a partner in the Employment Group.
I'm Lauren Russell. I'm an associate in our Emerging Companies Venture Capital Group.
I'm Markiana Julceus. I'm counsel in our white-collar defense practice group.
Now that Gen Z has entered the workplace, we have 4 generations working together: Baby Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z. Today's episode is going to dig into a topic that's not only timely, but personal for many of us: how different generations are navigating the push and pull of remote work and in-person work and the communication quirks that come with it. If you've ever worked on a multi-generational team, chances are you've seen these tensions firsthand. Maybe it's the Gen X partner who doesn't understand why Gen Z associates won't just pick up the phone. Maybe it's the millennial that refers to Zoom chats or Slack channels as AIMs. These are funny anecdotes, but they point to something deeper. Each generation brings its own values, habits, and expectations to the table. We're going to take a deeper dive to see how each group sees work differently and how to bridge the gap so teams can collaborate more effectively no matter what generation they are lumped into. Let's first go back to a world before COVID. What was the workplace like compared to now?
I guess I would start by saying this. So I started working at Lowenstein in 1997. And so it's not just a world before COVID, it's a world before
Lauren was born.
Yeah, before Lauren was born. Before we had laptops, before we had any real meaningful work from home, before really email. Email was really just emerging at the time that I started working. And I think people before me said they really didn't even have computers shortly before that. When I started, we did at least have computers. But if you were not in the office, you were constantly checking your voicemail. And there was a phone number, which I sometimes still call into if I have to check my voicemail, just check. But you didn't get an alert, you didn't get a thing, and you had to manually and compulsively keep checking into your voicemail.
How nerve-wracking.
Yes. So that was a thing. And so then obviously over time, then we moved on to BlackBerries, and then we became obsessed and glued to our BlackBerries. And that was the way we would at least check and know what was going on with email. Then when we got to iPhones, obviously all of that you guys are familiar with. And that was where things started and where we kind of were before COVID. But just even the notion of having to be in the office and be so physically accessible and available to work in the office, to be constantly checking voicemail, totally different dynamic than where we are now.
Yeah, so I remember a time that is probably a little different than the time Julie speaks of, because when I joined the firm in 2018, we had internet, although we did not yet have laptops, actually. It was a time before laptops. And so, if you had something that needed to be done, you would do it in the office, or if you had to do it from home, you had to log in remotely through Citrix, and you were on your personal laptop and you were remoting in to your computer, but it was so inefficient because Citrix was just impossibly slow. So anything you wanted to do, you did in the office, and work from home was very much less of a thing, I think, in that era.
So how did that work with eating dinner at the office? What about if you had to work on a weekend?
A lot more people ate dinner at the office. Row in the lab would just be full of dinners. And if I had to work on a weekend, I would physically come to the office most of the time. I had a case once where we had a bunch of contract attorneys reviewing documents. And again, this is before laptops, so they had to be physically on site here in the office. And if they had to be physically on site in the office, so did a full-time employee of this law firm. And lo and behold, it fell to the lowest person on the totem pole, me. So there was a period of time, I think there were 6 consecutive weeks where I was in the office every Saturday supervising these contract attorneys doing a document review.
I just want to add that the best thing about the firm when I started in the early days was exactly what you just said. We used to have a couple dozen people who all gathered, had dinner together. You literally just sat down. There wasn't cliques or groups or whatever. There were just literally you sat where the next open seat was. And that was how you got to meet different people at different levels, different departments. I mean, my best memories when I think back at the firm, it just was fun. It was a different energy when you were there in the evening and a lot of people were here in the evening. And so that was to me really what established the culture of the firm. So on the one hand, you go, oh my God, how miserable. We had to stay late and work and eat dinner at the firm. But that was really where people got to know each other in a very different way. And I would say I ate dinner at the firm probably for like the first 8 years of my tenure here and seldom if ever cooked, which was good and bad, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that gets lost a little bit in this like hybrid world we live in. And we could talk about it a little bit more later. But like, I feel like that downtime in the day, the forced downtime, like when you're like waiting for something to happen and you're at the firm and you're just like forced to be here because you didn't have a choice, right? You were like basically chained to the office if you needed to get something done. But maybe there'd be like a lag in time when you like chatted with people and hung out with people, or same thing with like going to mediation, right? Like there was a period of time mediation was always in person. And so as like a junior person on the case, if you're going with a partner to mediation, that's like an 8-hour day where, yeah, sure, you're with the mediator, but not all the time, right? So you're just chatting with the partner and the client in between. You're getting to know them. You're having those face-to-face interactions. Now, I've had a couple mediations this year, almost all of them have been via Zoom. And like the mediator leaves the room and everybody's like, all right, I'm going to go off camera and work on this other thing, right? So you kind of lose that. And I think it means you need to be a lot more intentional about trying to connect with people.
So let's talk about that. How has your approach changed to team building and internal networking now that people aren't in the office on Saturdays or don't always eat dinner here?
I think your word was intentional, and I think you do have to be much more intentional. And so while I'm sure Markiana and I both would gripe back in the day when you had to be here, like you said, nights, weekends, etc., that is really how you establish those kinds of relationships. So it definitely requires more intentionality. And I will say, on the one hand, as the more senior lawyer, certainly I strive to do that. But I do think that it is at some level incumbent upon the junior lawyer to try to take more initiative in that way. Because I think most senior lawyers would be receptive and completely open to people stopping by or asking to have coffee or that kind of thing. At least my experience is it doesn't happen as often. I would expect to be, again, easy for me to say now, like if I were in that position as a more junior lawyer, and I do know I took a lot of initiative in those days, I would expect that the junior lawyer should be taking the initiative and seek people out and try to make those connections.
As a junior associate, only having worked kind of post-COVID, how do you recommend we maximize our time in the office and kind of show our intention to team building and being committed to firm culture?
So I think that's a great question. I would say the people who you work most closely with, I would in the mornings, if you can, kind of stop by, even if it's just like, hey, good morning, and just kind of establish yourself in that way. I don't know. It depends obviously how close you are to people you're sitting with. I know the issue also, which has changed, is now that we have so many offices, right? Like you may be spending time working with people in our New York office and you're sitting in New Jersey, which on the one hand, you'd say, well, it doesn't really matter where I am. I could just be doing this from home. But I guess even establishing the connection with the people in your office, even if some of the people you're working with in the other, but just literally stopping by, good morning, how are you doing? And trying to sit in if you're going to have calls. Sometimes just sitting in the room with the person, they can sometimes are more inclined, like during the call, after the call, to just like, okay, here's like what happened, or kind of give you the play-by-play in a different way if you're like sitting in the room with them that they may not be inclined to do like after the call is over if you're not in the same space, perhaps.
What about you, Markiana? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of like just kind of doing my like round. So I'm in our little white collar L, right? And I will literally walk the hallway after like 3 hours of sitting at my desk and just like kind of pop my head in people's offices and be like, hey, how are you? Just to get my face in front of them. One, I get my steps in, but two, like it reminds people that you exist and it gives you like an opportunity for a 5-minute chat. It seems a lot scarier than it really is, right? I think it's hard to get over that hump of feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm intruding, like people are very busy. I don't want to bother people. But one, if people genuinely don't have time to talk, they will not be shy about telling you to like go away or come back later. And two, people do genuinely welcome the connection. And I think it's, to Julie's point, the partners all like want it and enjoy it, but like maybe doesn't necessarily occur to them to like reach out and be like, hey, let's get a coffee. So it kind of is on the junior folks to initiate it.
But it doesn't even have to be so formal as let's get a coffee. It's literally, as you said, just sticking your head in. Hey, how are you? What are you up to today? Or, hey, I have some free time. Is there anything I can help you with? Or, hey, I was just curious when we were on that Zoom. Why did this person say this? Why did you say that? Like those kinds of things I think are good to do.
And I think especially also when you're working like cross office, right? To try and go into the office. So like I work a lot with some partners in New York, and I try, despite the fact that I hate going to New York, I try and go like once a month, right? Just so that I know at least one time a month I'll get that like face-to-face in-person interaction. And I always make a point that one day when I go into New York, then I'm like, I don't just like go to my assigned office and like hide away in there. I like make a point to say hi to Rachel or say hi to Kathleen.
Or email them in advance and say, hey, I'm going to be in the New York office on Wednesday. Will you be around? That kind of thing. I'm sure they appreciate too.
That kind of leads into communication styles and how different generations want to communicate. How do you want junior associates to come ask you for work? Do you want them to stop by in person? Would you prefer an email?
I'm not sure if it's so generational. I think that's the type of thing that probably is very person specific. I don't have really a strong preference. I like the Zoom IMs, but really only when I'm like at my computer. It's not the first place where I would go to look. Like maybe I should look like after hours to just go, oh, did anybody IM me there? Because sometimes I'm not prone to just check there the way I would check like email and stuff. I think that is more individual probably than like generational. I don't know, Markiana, what you think?
I kind of agree with that. I also think to some degree, it's like, it depends on the nature of the communication. Like sometimes people will try and have like substantive conversations about like research in Zoom chat. And I'm like, please don't send me like cases in Zoom chat and like your analysis.
Probably been guilty of that.
No, not you, Julie. But like I'm talking about like somebody that have asked a research question that like is like sending me their like formal summary of the research in Zoom chat. I'll never find that again. Please send me an email that I can save in iManage.
I'll go worse beyond that. I always say save it then as a Word doc.
Yes.
Take your email and then save it as a Word doc or I'll never be able to find it. Yeah. But that's research.
Yeah, that's different. But just like, hey, I'm looking at this case, or hey, do you think this is something we should look into? Or like hey, do you have time to chat? Like those kinds of things I think are all very Zoom chat appropriate.
Or email or phone call.
Yeah, any of the above. I think like if you're in the office and the other person is in the office, maybe try and like reach out to them in person, like just pop by their office, just because I think, again, we have to be intentional about meeting people like face to face. But otherwise, I personally don't have much of a preference.
I think there's something that's very Gen Z about being averse to a phone call, which I know I've worked with numerous partners who've been like, just call me. And I'm like, I Zoom chat, I obsessively check calendars. And I think that's something that's very common in my generation. I share Google Calendars with my friends. You know what people are up to all the time. And I think that's probably one of the biggest kind of communication frictions I've had. And maybe that's because building relationships now is different. So you maybe feel less comfortable going out and calling people. But I guess I just don't really call people in my regular life either. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, Jessica.
Oh, I don't even like calling to make my own haircut appointments. So when I get a phone call, I think it's a 911 emergency versus an email. And I don't think older generations feel that way about phone calls.
Yeah, I'm pretty neutral on phone calls. My general preference is never like this is just who I am as a person. Like I'm not a big caller unless it's like an urgent thing and I need a response right away. Then I'm inclined to call somebody. Otherwise, I'll probably send an email. But like phone calls don't really bother me. Like I know some people, they see some like an unsolicited phone call and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting fired. Like what's happening? And that like...
Well, that's an unfortunate reaction.
Well, that I think is something for more senior folks to be mindful of. Like maybe it helps to send the Zoom chat that's like, hey, do you have 5 minutes to chat? Because sometimes it sends the junior folks into a tizzy if they just get the like unsolicited phone call. Although I don't know that the Zoom chat is any better. Thoughts? Like,
I think if someone says, do you have a quick second to chat? I think no matter what, at least speaking for myself and some of my other kind of Gen Z colleagues, I think the assumption is always a little bit of a spiral.
Just to say, do you have a minute to chat? What should they write? If not, just to say, can we discuss this matter? Oh, that you want an agenda?
Yes, I want an agenda. I feel like so much of being a junior associate is needing to be prepared. So a cold call where you don't have, I'm a prolific note taker. I don't have my notes out. I feel very caught off guard. So maybe something, do you have a minute to chat about this specifically would be good.
So basically you want everything to be a scheduled call.
Yes, but maybe that's just me as well.
Again, not sure if it's a generational difference or just a personality difference, right? I will say, for the power of a phone call, recently I had like an interaction with a government officer who was trying to schedule an interview of my client and really wanted this like third party present that did not want to attend. When they sent this email that was like, I want this person to appear, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how I'm going to get this third party to show up. And I decided to just like pick up the phone and call. The lady from the government was like, oh yeah, they don't need to go. That's perfectly fine. Actually, we can do the interview of your client over Zoom. We don't even need to do it in person. You guys don't need to trek down to South Jersey. So I think like phone calls really can be a powerful thing. Like, and that's just like with a stranger, right? But I think like this applies similarly at work with your colleagues. Like you can get a little bit more traction on a phone call. You get to know people better.
Now that we have iPhones and we have our Zoom apps on our iPhones, we can get chats 24/7. We can get phone calls 24/7. We have our laptops. We can use a hotspot anywhere. How do we set boundaries?
I never had boundaries. I still don't have boundaries. I would give my kids, one who has since graduated from college, I remember giving her a bath and I had my BlackBerry right next to me. And when you have a newborn baby, it's like, God forbid, the baby's going to drown in the bathtub. And I would be giving my baby a bath. And I literally had my BlackBerry there. And just in case, look, when I say there's no boundaries, of course, there are boundaries in terms of if you're going to be away on vacation, etc. Of course, and of course, tell people. But at the same time, that is the downfall of having this technology of iPhones and whatnot, is that you do have to essentially be responsive. Doesn't mean you have to answer that second, but I do think it has always been, and especially now so, and particularly in a client service business, that we are being responsive.
I think that's a good nuance, being responsive versus I need to do a hotspot and get my laptop out right this second versus sending an email, acknowledging receipt and communicating.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious, are the constant notifications better or worse than compulsively checking a voicemail?
No, I guess for ease, probably the notifications are better because it's just available as opposed to feeling, like you said, having to check the voicemail. I just remember, you didn't do it as frequently. Maybe I check voicemail 2 or 3 times at night, where email, I check every 5 or 10 minutes on the weekends, but pretty frequently still on the weekends. And I think it's the notion of being responsive. And again, it's not you have to work on the thing that second. It's that you have to acknowledge that you are going to respond with some sense and just being accessible and available. That is just inherently, because we're in a client service business. I think if we weren't, maybe it's different, but that's the nature of our business. And I guess at some level also, people always say you have like your internal clients and your external clients. And so for better, for worse, the prize for good work here is more work. It just is. And so that is one of the things I think all lawyers here like it when you are responsive, and it just shows some level of commitment that somebody who's less responsive may not be demonstrating.
So how do you think that kind of shift that you've seen during your tenure here has affected your relationship with both your internal and external clients?
I don't know that it's changed it in any way. I guess I would say one of the things that I think I've historically been known for here, maybe this is also me just sounding compulsive, because I think one of the things, my differentiator is responsiveness. And I think clients appreciate that. And when we are, I guess I'll go back to in a business where we're trying to differentiate ourselves with other lawyers at other law firms, the thing that clients often will comment and say is they appreciate how responsive you were, or how quick you were to get back to me.
Do you think that shifts as we spend more time on Zoom versus in person? I've only met clients a handful of times compared to, I think, going to meetings in person, going to do doc review in person where you had to go to rooms and complete diligence on site.
I actually would say it a little differently. Yes, there are definitely many that I met in person, but there were also equally as many that I spoke to on the phone. I had no idea what they looked like. So it wasn't until Zoom, which is really COVID, going back to your initial question about COVID, it wasn't even until COVID, when we started with Zoom, that you even got to see what people look like. Many people, because you just had no reason necessarily to meet them. I knew their voices. Before we had, like in our iPhone where you have them in your contacts, I used to have 1 million people call me and go, hi, it's me. And I had to like figure out who's me, right? Because they weren't in my contacts. Or I had like 10 clients named Mike, and they were like, hey, it's Mike. And or whatever the name is, I go, which one is? And I'd have to start talking and figure out who they were, but I didn't know what they look like. And now obviously with Zoom. So pros and cons, obviously, to all of the above.
Any phone call like that is like pre-scheduled, I do as a Zoom. I like seeing people's faces. Plus, it's like a nice little connection point with clients. Julie and I have one client that like we had a Zoom with, and she's got all her like medals from marathons, and you can ask her about the marathons. Like, I feel like you get to know people a little bit more. It's closer to having those real life in-person conversations, which I agree are a rarity, but to Julie's point, like always kind of have been when you're in like a firm of this size and you're serving people that are kind of nationwide to some degree.
What are ways that all generations can better accommodate each other so we can more effectively communicate and work together?
Again, and not to sound as hierarchical as this sounds, but I think it's probably at some level, not completely, but the junior person's sort of responsibility to accommodate the more senior person. I mean, I remember, again, I feel very old saying I walked up down the hill both ways in the snow and all that kind of stuff. I remember literally all-nighters here. But I also remember one of the partners with whom I work most closely, she was here at 2 a.m. also. And I was like, oh my God, when I get to be her age, I don't want to be here at 2 a.m. And I was amazed that she was. And I am now probably older than she was at the time. And I'm not here at 2 a.m. So I guess there's something to be said for that. But I reacted to her. I wasn't going to go home before her, right? I had to accommodate that was her expectation. And I had to just kind of go with it.
That's an interesting mentality with remote work, because I think the idea of getting here before your boss and staying later than your boss is just very different when people leave and try to go home at different times to beat traffic or see their kids.
Ed Zimmerman, I remember back in the day, like when his babies were born and I was working closely, and he would leave every day at like 5:45 because he lived very close to the firm. And every day I think he had dinner with his family at 6:00. And I just really was impressed by that. I mean, maybe not to put a double standard, but as a male employee who wanted to go home and see his kids and like put them to bed. And then I remember he came back to the firm and I was still here because I was the more junior lawyer working, and that really resonated with me. And so the idea, as you mentioned, like people, especially with young children and wanting to see them and put them to bed, I think obviously that is the benefit now. It's understood. Of course, you can take time to do that. And then it's understood also that you'll log back on after they go to bed, and which is obviously better than having to come back to the firm, which people did used to do, and have to hire babysitters at night to come back to the firm and that type of thing.
Yeah, so I think the concept of like beating your boss to the office and staying later than them has like kind of like at least physically gone out the window, just because like people's work hours are kind of like, I don't want to say erratic, but people are like building work hours that like suit their real life schedule. But I think like to some degree you can take that into effect in your like workflow, right? For example, there are partners I work with that I know like to start their mornings very early.
Don't you have a call with retired judge and who used to call you at 7 a.m. or something?
In those cases, I have something that I'm getting to a partner that likes to start their workday at like 6:00 in the morning. I'm going to like make sure that like whatever it is that I'm sending them, if I've told them I'm going to get them something on Tuesday, I'm going to try and get it to them Tuesday early in the morning, because I know that's like when they work, as opposed to like there are some partners I know that like routinely stay up till 2 a.m. Those folks, I don't feel bad getting them something at like 10 p.m. because I know that's when they're going to have time to look at it. Right. So I think about people's workflows and work styles sometimes in how I'm delivering work. I think that's really where it comes into play nowadays.
When you work with people for the first time, and I guess it's more common for junior associates, it's a big firm, there's a lot of different people to work with. How do you think is the best way to go about figuring that out?
Yeah. Ask other people. I'm always inclined to ask others, but I suppose you could also just like ask the partner, right, that you're working with, or the senior associate. Like,
yeah, but I probably would start
with others.
With others, just the reality is, so it doesn't seem so direct.
Yeah.
Not to say you can't, but...
Yeah, like theoretically you could, but I can't say that I ever have.
Well, tell us from your perspective, I guess I would say. What feedback do you have for us?
I guess one of the biggest challenges of this job, because you're not necessarily fully trained on how to be an attorney, and this is my first job, so you're learning substantive legal matters. But I think there's so much of the push and pull socially, and learning how to navigate that is challenging. And I think you don't feel like you can necessarily ask the people you're working with, like, are you a morning person? When do you look at things? And a lot of it is ad hoc, figuring it out as you go.
But that seems fair. I think you could tell because you know when you're receiving their emails, for example. And so you can tell from that alone, right?
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm just one of those people that likes to know what I'm going into. And I think sometimes that can be really challenging, especially because it's hard when we've been given advice, like you have to beat your boss, but people come in at completely different times. So it's hard to navigate what the new normal is when what almost everyone else who's kind of come up above us kind of came up during a different time. So finding kind of that balance.
And I think it's a mix of generational differences and a post-COVID world that everyone's trying to navigate. But I do think it's nice and reassuring when you see more senior people leaving to take care of their kids and eat dinner with their kids and put them to bed and then log back on. It almost makes it seem like that's doable, where maybe it wasn't as doable 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I kind of almost feel like that's the expectation. And especially with the men, I would say you see a lot more of that with the men, I'm sure, over the years than we used to. And I think that's all great progress. Obviously, we have more male lawyers taking parental leave. And I think that's a really good message. And certainly at this firm, I feel like that's been in place for quite some time and continues to increase. So all of those, I think, are good messages for people to see.
Well, thanks for joining us today for another episode of the Women's Initiative Network, Real Talk. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please subscribe to our podcast series at lowenstein.com/podcasts or find us on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, or SoundCloud. Lowenstein Sandler podcast series are presented by Lowenstein Sandler and cannot be copied or rebroadcast without consent. The information provided is intended for a general audience. It is not legal advice or substitute for the advice of counsel. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The content reflects the personal views and opinions of the participants. No attorney-client relationship is being created by this podcast, and all rights are reserved.